Hi everyone. We have just passed our 1-year anniversary of The Trail Went Cold, but we never would have reached this point without such a loyal following of listeners. So we want to get to know you better. Please take a few minutes to tell us about yourself by taking our audience survey. Go to our website, trailwentcold.com, and click on the audience survey link. Thanks everyone. July 4th, 1999. Travelers Rest, South Carolina. The parents of 20-year-old Brooke Henson return to their home at 2 a.m., where she tells them she is going to walk to a nearby store to buy cigarettes. Brooke never returns home and is not heard from again. Years later, investigators are shocked to discover that Brooke has registered for classes at Columbia University. It turns out a con artist has stolen Brooke's identity, but even after she is caught, Brooke's disappearance remains unsolved. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Minisode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today I will be covering the 1999 disappearance of a young woman named Brooke Henson. While no one specifically requested that I feature this case on the podcast, I actually decided to cover it because it's loosely related to a couple of other listener requests that I've received. One of them is the 1994 disappearance of 13-year-old Nicholas Barclay. As you probably know, this case was the subject of the acclaimed true crime documentary The Imposter, because a French con artist named Frederic Bourdin surfaced years later and pretended to be the missing boy. I've also received requests to cover the Lane Bryant shooting, which was the unsolved murder of 5 people at a Lane Bryant clothing store in Tinley Park, Illinois in 2008. Well, both of these cases have already been covered by other true crime podcasters I know, who have both done their own excellent episodes. Allie and Charlie from the Insight podcast recently did an episode on Nicholas Barclay, and Nina Instead from the Already Gone podcast has covered the Lane Bryant shooting, and I highly recommend you check both those episodes out because they are both terrific podcasts. So my alternative is to do a minisode on Brooke Henson, because, like Nicholas Barclay, she is another missing person who had her identity stolen by a con artist. And her case also has a very loose connection to the Lane Bryant shooting, which I'll get into in a little while. I previously featured this case in an article I wrote for listverse.com titled 10 Controversial Missing Persons Cases, which was originally published in August 2013. In fact, this is the third case from that particular list which I've covered on this podcast, and it probably won't be the last. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which alternates between our regular full-length episodes and 15 to 20 minute minisodes like this one. We deliver either a new full-length episode or a new minisode every Wednesday. We're currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it. The Trail Went Cold also has its own PayPal account and a donate button on the website. If there's anyone out there who's feeling generous and wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out on a future episode. We also received a new donation this week from a listener named Timothy, so thank you very much, Timothy. Like I said earlier, The Trail Went Cold just passed an important milestone by reaching our 1-year anniversary. We had ourselves a very successful first year, but we are always looking for ways to improve our show. The podcast never would have gone as far as it has without such a devoted following of listeners, so the best way to improve is to learn more about you. And what better way to do so than by asking you folks to complete our audience survey? It helps us learn more about you and what you like most about the show. You can find the audience survey link at our website, trailwentcold.com. The survey only takes 5 minutes to fill out, and you can skip any questions you don't want to answer. Please take a couple minutes to help us out, so that our second year of The Trail Went Cold will be even better than our first. Once again, go to trailwentcold.com and click on the audience survey link. Thanks everyone. So with all that out of the way, let us now delve into the unsolved disappearance of Brooke Henson. Our story begins in 1999. Our central figure is 20-year-old Brooke Henson, who lives with her family in the small town of Travelers Rest, South Carolina. On the evening of July 3rd, Brooke's parents went to Charlotte, North Carolina for an Allman Brothers concert, so Brooke decided to invite a bunch of friends over and hold a party at their house. At around 2 a.m., Brooke's parents returned home and saw her sitting on the front porch in tears. Brooke told them she had just gotten into an argument with her boyfriend Sean Shirley. She also mentioned she was planning to break up with him, leave town, and not return until 5 years later. Brooke then said she was going to walk to a nearby store to pick up some cigarettes. Shortly after that, Brooke apparently spoke with her boyfriend again and got into another argument with him, so she left behind a note which read, "Follow me if you care." The last time Brooke was seen was approximately 2:30, heading in the direction of the store which was located 2 blocks away. However, Brooke did not return home, and when her parents were unable to find her, they attempted to report her missing. But unfortunately, like many missing persons cases involving young people, the police did not take the disappearance seriously at first, believing that Brooke just took off voluntarily and would return soon. They did not actually start searching for Brooke until 3 weeks later. Apparently, there were reports that Brooke was seen at a lakeside party after she left her house that night. This party took place in nearby River Falls, which is located next to the Blue Ridge Mountains. There were also reports of what was described as a foul-smelling barbecue in the area around this time. Investigators focused most of their attention on Brooke's boyfriend, Sean Shirley, who had quarreled with her right before she went missing. Sean had a pretty extensive criminal record and was known for having a volatile relationship with Brooke. In fact, the very same weekend Brooke vanished, Sean was arrested for abusing 2 minors. When police attempted to question Sean about Brooke's disappearance, he refused to cooperate with them and lawyered up. Investigators also looked into a former boyfriend of Brooke's, as there were rumors that she was planning to run away with him. However, this guy died of an overdose before he could be questioned. Even though his death was ruled a suicide, some people apparently suspected foul play. After this, the investigation pretty much hit a dead end. Sadly, it sounds like Brooke's parents had their marriage and their lives fall completely apart after this. Her father was stricken with multiple sclerosis, and her mother was overcome with debilitating anxiety, so it was Brooke's aunt who was pretty much tasked with the responsibility of keeping her case in the spotlight. Like the Nicholas Barclay disappearance, Brooke's story was just one of thousands of unsolved missing persons cases which got lost in the shuffle, until a very unlikely series of events put it back into the spotlight. In 2006, investigators made a pretty shocking discovery. Brooke Henson's name, date of birth, and social security number had been used to register for classes at the School of General Studies at Columbia University in New York City. And the circumstances of how this discovery was made are pretty remarkable. In July of that year, a woman calling herself Brooke Henson applied for a part-time job doing housework in the area. The employer did a Google search on her name and was surprised to see that the top matches listed Brooke Henson as a missing person from Travelers Rest, South Carolina, so the police were notified. They tracked down the woman claiming to be Brooke, who told them that she'd run away from Travelers Rest voluntarily and cut off all contact with her family because she was a victim of domestic abuse. The woman was asked questions about Brooke's background and answered most of them correctly, so investigators were inclined to believe she was actually Brooke Henson. But there were still some major issues. It seemed unlikely that Brooke could have gotten into Columbia University because she dropped out of school in the 10th grade. And when Brooke's aunt saw a photo of this woman, she was pretty certain it wasn't Brooke. The police then asked this woman to take a DNA test to prove she was Brooke, and, well, she promptly disappeared after that. It turned out that Brooke was actually a 28-year-old woman named Esther Reed, who originally hailed from Townsend, Montana, and had a very checkered history of fraud and identity theft. Believe it or not, this was not the first time that Reed, who never actually graduated high school, stole someone's identity to enroll at an academic institution. She had previously registered to take classes at California State University after assuming the identity of the sister of one of her former boyfriends, and she used another stolen identity to enroll in Harvard Extension School. In 2004, she came across Brooke Henson's name after searching online and discovering a missing persons website devoted to her. Reed figured that no one would notice if she took over the identity of a missing person who was presumed dead, and the website provided enough personal info about Brooke that she was able to pull it off. After getting a hold of Brooke's social security number and acquiring a copy of her birth certificate, Reed used her new identity to complete her GED before enrolling in Harvard Extension School and Columbia University. In total, Reed used her stolen identities to take over $100,000 in student loans and racked up a bunch of credit card debt and unpaid bills. After she went on the run, Reed made the Secret Service's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list and was even profiled on America's Most Wanted. Anyway, now I'm going to tell you how this story ties into the Lane Bryant shooting. In case you're not familiar with that case, it occurred when an unidentified black man committed an armed robbery at a Lane Bryant clothing store in Tinley Park, Illinois on February 2, 2008. Before he left, the gunman fatally shot 5 women in the store and wounded one other, but he has never been caught, and the case remains unsolved. Well, in the aftermath of this horrible tragedy, Tinley Park was put on high alert, and police made it a point to run a check on all out-of-state license plates they happened to see. The day after the shooting, they came across a vehicle with out-of-state plates in the parking lot of the Sleep Inn, a motel located only a few miles away from the Lane Bryant store. Police decided to question the owner of the vehicle and knocked on the door to their room. A woman answered and provided them with an ID with the name Jennifer Myers, but police discovered it was fake. When this woman was brought in for questioning, she soon confessed that she was Esther Reed. So in an astonishing coincidence, even though the Lane Bryant shooter was never caught, his actions indirectly paved the way for one of the country's most wanted identity thieves to be caught. Anyway, Reed pled guilty to multiple felonies, was sentenced to 51 months in prison, and was released in October of 2011. After thoroughly investigating her, the authorities determined that Reed had no involvement in Brooke Henson's disappearance, and only picked her at random when she decided to steal a new identity. Unfortunately, this whole episode gave Brooke's family the false impression that she was still alive, but the bright spot was that it put Brooke's case in the spotlight and gave it more exposure than it ever saw before. But it didn't bring the case any closer to being solved. The most recent article I've seen is from October of 2015, which stated that authorities had recently received a tip which they believed might be a potential break in this case. Thus far, however, it doesn't look like this tip has led anywhere, and Brooke Henson continues to remain a missing person. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Okay, now that I've shared Esther Reed's crazy story with you, I think we can bring her chapter to a close. 48 Hours did an entire episode about her, so if you want to learn more about Reed, I suggest you check it out. Unfortunately, even though this situation brought Brooke Henson's case some extra media attention, the 48 Hours episodes focused the majority of their attention on Reed. So I would prefer the rest of this podcast focus more on the victim, rather than some sociopathic con artist. We know that Reed herself didn't cause Brooke's disappearance, so who did? Unfortunately, it's easy to see why Brooke's disappearance didn't get the attention it deserved at first. Like I mentioned earlier, Brooke was a high school dropout, and while I'm not sure if she was a troublemaker or a criminal, her boyfriend was a criminal, and she apparently had a number of people in her life who were involved in criminal activity. It sounds like Brooke's parents had a reputation for being pretty laid back, as they often let people crash at their house and held parties there. So the police probably didn't hold a high opinion of the family, and figured that Brooke was just acting up and would return eventually. It also probably didn't help that right before she disappeared, Brooke told her parents that she was planning to break up with her boyfriend and leave town. But I don't think she said she was leaving town to create some drama. It sounds like she wanted to leave town because she was genuinely afraid of her boyfriend and how he might react if she broke up with him. Whatever her plans, it seems unlikely that Brooke would just walk away and skip town at 2:30 in the morning, leaving everything behind. Something obviously happened to her that night shortly after she left her house. In recent years, investigators have changed their tune and now believe Brooke was murdered. They've said they have a suspect in her disappearance, but lack the evidence to charge him, so he's never been publicly named. Well, the only potential suspect we know of is Brooke's boyfriend, Sean Shirley. At the time, he was 30 years old, 10 years older than Brooke, and had a reputation in town for being a bad boy. Like I mentioned earlier, Sean had an extensive criminal record involving drugs and assault, and actually one of the offenses he has listed on his rap sheet is lynching, which is pretty disturbing. This totally sounds like the type of guy who would react badly if his girlfriend broke up with him, and the fact that Sean and Brooke had been fighting right before she vanished is pretty unnerving. However, before we completely implicate Sean, we would have to know some more details, such as his alibi after Brooke left the house that night. We do know that Brooke walked away after leaving a note for Sean that read, "Follow me if you care," so it seems like he was still at the house after Brooke's parents got home. I read that Sean had a tendency to show up there and sleep over whenever he felt like it. Brooke's parents might have gone to bed after arriving home that night, and can't account for Sean's whereabouts, but my big question is whether anyone else was at the house at that time. Brooke held a party there that night, but I'm not sure if the party was over at 2:30, and if everyone else had gone home by then. It would be helpful if other witnesses could confirm that Sean found Brooke's note and decided to leave the house to follow her. I've read that not only did Sean refuse to cooperate with the investigation into Brooke's disappearance, but his friends were uncooperative as well. But were these same friends at Brooke's house on the night she disappeared? I'm curious about the alleged sightings of Brooke at the lakeside party in River Falls, and I have no idea if she was officially confirmed to be there or not. But if those sightings are accurate, then maybe Brooke was never actually planning to go buy cigarettes, and just told her parents that to cover up the fact that she was going to another party. River Falls is a heavily wooded region where there would be numerous places to dispose of a dead body. Those reports about a foul-smelling barbecue seem to hint at the possibility that Brooke's body was burned, but it was 3 weeks before police even attempted to perform a search for her, and by that time, there had been enough rainfall to wash away potential evidence. Now, I should mention that just because Sean Shirley refused to cooperate with the police does not automatically mean he was responsible for what happened to Brooke. The guy was already heavily involved in criminal activity, so he might have had his own reasons for not speaking to the police, which had nothing to do with Brooke. But if Sean was the unnamed suspect that the police have referred to, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. Sean had heated arguments with Brooke before she went missing. She was talking about leaving him, and she seemed genuinely frightened of him. But without any hard evidence, we can't point the finger at Sean with 100% certainty. Unfortunately, what does seem certain is that Brooke was murdered shortly after walking away from her home, and I'd wager that her remains are probably buried in a nearby wooded area somewhere, and have just never been found. It's too bad the investigation was led on such a wild goose chase when Esther Reed stole Brooke's identity, but since that matter is now closed, hopefully closure can now be achieved in Brooke's story as well. So if you have any information about the unsolved disappearance of Brooke Henson, please contact the appropriate authorities. And also, if you happen to have any information about the unsolved shooting from the Lane Bryant store in Tinley Park, Illinois on February 2nd, 2008, please contact the authorities about that as well, as there's still an unidentified man out there who has gotten away with 5 murders. But if you just have your own theory about either of these cases, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. I want to thank all my loyal listeners and supporters out there, especially those from the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I'd also like to give one more recommendation to the 2 other true crime podcasts I mentioned in my intro, Insight and Already Gone. And I want to throw in another plug for the Facebook group Podcasts We Listen To, which is a great place for fans to discuss their favorite podcasts, and a lot of podcast hosts are members, including myself, Allie and Charlie from Insight, Nina from Already Gone, and many others. So if you're a podcast fan or host, be sure to join Podcasts We Listen To on Facebook. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. And like I mentioned earlier, we have a donate button on our website, so if you're feeling generous and want to express your appreciation for all the hard work we put into this podcast, we'd be extremely grateful. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.